Have you ever heard of the Battle of Clontarf? It's one of Ireland's most legendary battles, a clash of Vikings and Irish kings that changed the course of history. But beyond the famous story of Brian Boru, there are countless tales of the clans who fought beside him and their centuries-long struggle for their homeland. Today, we're diving deep into one of those stories, the epic saga of the Farrell clan of Annally. Our story begins over 1,000 years ago, in the year 1014. Ireland was a patchwork of kingdoms, not a single unified nation. For decades, Viking raiders had established settlements, most notably in Dublin, and their influence was spreading. But one man rose to challenge this. His name was Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland. He was a brilliant military strategist and a unifying force, determined to drive the Vikings out and unite the island under his rule. Brian wasn't alone in this fight. He forged alliances with powerful Gaelic chieftains from all across Ireland. Among these loyal allies was Feargal Ua Ruarc, the king of Connaught, and other key figures like Feargal o Feargael, the chieftain of Annally, which is now modern-day County Longford. These chieftains weren't just followers, they were powerful leaders in their own right, and they saw the strategic importance of siding with Brian. Annally was a strategic buffer zone, a marcher territory, and the Farrells were its fierce protectors. By joining Brian, they were not only fighting for a united Ireland, but also securing their own lands and power against rival clans and the encroaching Norse Gaels. The stage was set for a monumental confrontation. On one side, you had Brian Boru and his coalition of Irish kings, including the forces from Annally. On the other, a formidable army led by the Viking king of Dublin, Sigtryg Silkbeard. Sigtryg had his own powerful allies, including Vikings from the Isle of Man and the Orkney Islands, and his Irish rival, Mael Morda MacMurchada, the king of Leinster. This wasn't a simple Irish versus Viking fight. It was a complex web of alliances and rivalries. On Good Friday, April 23, 1014, these two massive armies clashed on the fields of Clontarf, just outside Dublin. The battle was ferocious, a brutal day-long struggle that raged from sunrise to sunset. The chronicles tell of a bloody, chaotic scene where thousands of warriors fought and died. The forces of Annally, under the Farrell banner, were right there in the thick of it, fighting alongside Brian's sons and other allied clans. They fought with incredible bravery, contributing significantly to the High King's army. By the end of the day, Brian Boru's forces were victorious. The Leinster Viking army was crushed, their leaders slain. It was a decisive victory that shattered the power of the Dublin Vikings for good. But the victory came at a terrible cost. As the battle drew to a close, the aging High King Brian Boru, who was in his tent praying for victory, was discovered by a fleeing Viking commander named Brodir. In a final act of defiance, Brodir murdered the unarmed king, striking him down. Brian Boru, the man who had united Ireland and won its greatest battle, did not live to see the fruits of his victory. His son Murshad and his grandson Terdelbach also fell in the battle, a devastating blow to the royal line. For the Farrells and the other clans of Annally, the victory at Clontarf cemented their reputation as formidable warriors and loyal allies. They had stood with the High King and prevailed. They returned to their lands in Longford not just as victors, but as key players in the new power structure of post-Clontarf Ireland. For the next century and a half, the Farrell clan ruled Annally, building their power base, constructing forts and governing their territory. They were the undisputed lords of Longford, a legacy forged in the blood and fire of Clontarf. But peace in medieval Ireland was never long-lasting. A new threat was gathering across the sea. In 1169, a new wave of invaders arrived on Irish shores, the Normans. These were not Viking raiders looking for plunder. They were ambitious, heavily armoured knights seeking land and conquest. Led by figures like Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow, they quickly began to carve out kingdoms for themselves, aided by their superior military technology like castles and crossbows. Just a few years later, in 1172, the Norman King of England, Henry II, arrived in Ireland to assert his authority over both the Norman lords and the Irish kings. He granted huge swathes of land to his loyal barons. The entire kingdom of Meath, which included the Farrells' territory of Annally, was handed over to a powerful Norman lord named Hugh de Lacy. Just like that, With the stroke of a royal pen, the Farrells were declared tenants on their own ancestral land. The land they had ruled for centuries, the land they had fought for at Clontarf, was now legally owned by a foreign invader. You can imagine how the Farrell clan reacted to this. They were not about to simply give up their birthright. What followed was not a single battle, but a relentless 200-year struggle to reclaim their home. The Normans, under de Lacy and his successors, began building motte and bailey castles all over Longford, trying to solidify their control. But the Farrells refused to be subdued. They engaged in a long and brutal guerrilla war. They launched surprise attacks on Norman castles, ambushed their patrols, and burned their settlements. They used their intimate knowledge of the land, the bogs, forests, and rivers of Longford, to their advantage. This wasn't a war of pitched battles, which they would have lost against the heavily armoured Norman knights. It was a war of attrition, a constant campaign of harassment designed to make the Norman occupation untenable. The chronicles from this period are filled with accounts of the Farrells fighting back. They record how the clan would raid Norman-held territories, drive off their cattle, and then melt back into the landscape before a response could be mustered. This was a fight for survival, for their identity, and for the very land that defined them. It was a testament to their resilience and their warrior spirit, the same spirit that had taken their ancestors to the field of Clontarf. Slowly, painstakingly, their strategy began to work. The constant pressure made it incredibly difficult and expensive for the Normans to maintain their grip on Annerley. Over generations, the Norman families who had been granted the land either abandoned it or were driven out. By the 15th century, the Farrells had successfully reconquered their territory. They had pushed the invaders out and re-established themselves as the undisputed lords of Annerley. It was an incredible achievement. A rare story of a native Irish clan successfully winning back their lands from the powerful Norman conquerors. The story of the Farrell clan is a powerful reminder that history is not just about big battles and famous kings. It's about the enduring spirit of people fighting for their homes and their heritage. From their crucial role in the victory at Clontarf to their centuries-long fight against the Normans, the Farrells of Longford carved out a legacy of resilience, courage, and an unbreakable connection to their land. It's a story that deserves to be told, a vital chapter in the rich and complex tapestry of Irish history. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the fascinating stories of the past. Let me know in the comments what piece of history you'd like to explore next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.